All right, welcome everybody to another episode of Needs Some Introduction. In today's episode, we will be discussing this is the Cannes Award-winning Best Film of the Year, by the way, from back in May when this thing premiered. It's been buzzing all year long and it played at all the film festivals. Celia, by the way, tried to get tickets for us to see this at the Montclair Film Festival, but it was all sold out, of course, because everybody was dying to see it. The movie is Anora, and we're talking about it now because we were lucky enough to see it early last weekend, but this weekend, this upcoming Friday, will be available nationwide in wide release. So everybody who hasn't heard it or hasn't had a chance to see it before will be able to see it. So we're going to structure the conversation to, first of all, start off with just general impressions, no spoilers of any kind. Then, Celia, I think what we'll do is we'll probably talk about the first half of the movie with not spoilers, but just details, because I think most of what happens in the first half of the movie is pretty much laid out in the trailer itself. And then we will explicitly talk about what happens at the end. I think we very much need to talk about the very last scene in this movie as well, which is such a knockout for me anyway. And we need to talk about that. So we will have a spoiler section. But of course, if you're hearing this and it's not available in your territory, not available nationwide yet, then do not spoil yourself on this movie. Really go and experience it. It is an experience. And then come back for our conversation. I'm also not going to get into politics, even though this is the day after Election Day. Most of the people I correspond with on a regular basis via email, and do reach out to us if you'd like. Most of those people are overseas and they've been concerned about this election. And all I can say to all of you is, I'm sorry, but it's not my fault. So
I'm sorry too.
we will probably be touching on political issues because this film itself, believe it or not, Anora, is actually a political metaphor. And I'm going to get into the career of this filmmaker and how he makes these very ground level, very embedded stories about these marginal cultural figures, but he does so to expose something about our culture more widely. And all his films work, and I'll break this down as his previous films that you should definitely track down as recommendations. They work as entertainments, they work within a particular genre, and yet there is something more substantial. And by the way, this filmmaker, writer, director of this film, Sean Baker, Celia, from New Jersey. Hey, another New Jersey represent.
Nice.
The center of the universe is cultural universe.
I think so.
All right, so let's kick things off with Anora. As I mentioned before, this is from the filmmaker Sean Baker. He started back in the 1990s making a adult puppet animated show on Fox called Greg the Rabbit. People may remember this. It was canceled from Fox pretty quickly, but then continued to run on cable for a couple more years. And it wasn't a huge success, but got him enough money to start to try to make his own films. And right from the very start, I have not seen his first two films, but I'll include a Letterboxd link here for anybody who wants to track them down. First two films are kind of hard to find, although very well regarded. They played at some festivals. Very, very low budget. I think his first film cost $3,000 to make, but they are very much like the films that he has been, become famous for making, where they very much embed you in a community where you really feel like you know this place. You're very much at ground level with usually some minority or some kind of outsider group of people. And he made these very low budget films, well regarded, but that got him enough attention to make a slightly bigger budget film, which won a bunch of awards. And it was actually in competition at Cannes some 7 or 8 years ago at this point, called Tangerine, which was all shot on iPhones. And it was about these two trans prostitutes who are actual trans prostitutes who live in Florida. And they're basically on this quest to track down one of their pimps who used to be her boyfriend. And these were actual sex workers that were in the film. So a couple of themes there: marginalized community, sex workers, right? Because his next film was The Florida Project, which got a bunch of Academy Award nominations and is truly excellent. If you've never seen that movie, it's really great. And there we start seeing this metaphor once again. Celia, have you seen The Florida Project?
I did. I saw both of those movies.
Oh, you did?
I'm a fan of this director, yes.
Yes, very much so. I agree. Love The Florida Project. And just like the film we're going to talk about today, it has these aspects of, it is very much a very humane story about these people living in this condition. There's really no good guys or bad guys. It's really the culture they live in, which is kind of oppressing them. And everybody's kind of trapped within the same society. Once again, we have a sex worker, one of the main characters. Obviously, these are, for people who don't know about the film itself, it's about this culture. Once again, a culture I knew nothing about. Florida gives these low-end motels weekly rates for people who are on welfare or on other kind of subsidies from the state who live there. And if this particular motel is right outside of Disney World. So it's this idea that right out over that wall is this fantasy of what a child's life could be. And then we see these children living in like squalor pretty much, but having a good time of it, right? As you are kids, you basically just make the best of your lifetime. A great film with an incredible final scene also. And then he followed that up with Red Rocket, which is very entertaining, which I just saw recently.
Saw that too. Really good.
Yes. And in that one, you have Simon Rex, famous from MTV as a VJ, who is a porn star who's kind of fallen out with his ex-wife and also lost his way in his career. And he starts to groom and seduce this teenage girl, and they start a relationship, which is not really a healthy relationship, but in a way, he's so immature, they're kind of mental peers in a strange sort of way. And of course, in the background of that entire film is the 2016 Trump election of Trump. And you see that as kind of the backdrop of this particular border town in Texas, which once again, introducing us to a particular milieu, a particular culture that we're not familiar with. And once again, I have to say, one of these incredible things, this most incredible skill that Sean Baker has as a director and a writer, is that even though these films are all very episodic, you could write a biography for each one of these characters. Like, you know them so well, even though we're spending just, sometimes just minutes at a time. I'm very curious to get your take on that, but I think that's very true of Anora itself.
That's the main thing that I was noticing in the movie, is that I fell madly in love with Anora, the actual character of Anora, right, because the movie set up so brilliantly with not even giving too much information on a backstory, but everything that you need to know to enjoy the movie, to really see what they're thinking. I could literally see what they're thinking. At least I thought so. It was amazing.
Yes, this is an amazing movie. I completely agree. Let me count the ways. There's so many ways. I mean, first of all the performances in this are really great. Even these secondary characters, they are not traditional gangster bullies or whatever. They all have their own agendas and they all have their own stresses. And we empathize with every single person in the film, and we can imagine what their biography is. And I'd like to dig into some of that as we go forward as well. But yes, primarily, number one, Mickey Madison here playing Anora, or Annie, as she prefers to call herself, is just incredible. Has a very unique look. She's very beautiful, but very unique look. As soon as you see her once, she always sticks in your head. I remember seeing her Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. You actually saw her as a child actress, right? You've been watching her for years, right? When you watched.
Oh yes. What is that sitcom? It's amazing.
Better Things? Is it Better Things?
Yes.
Is that
so good.
Which I've never seen, but I've heard great things about.
You would not like her in that. Not till later. She's such a entitled brat, screeching, like making her mother want to just jump out windows. She is so unlikable. But at the same time, it's like she's taking a neurotic teen girl experience, which, you'll see, Victor.
I can't wait.
Well, maybe not, but maybe. And amplifying it to this comedic level where it's actually grating. I'm thinking, if I had this teenager in my life, I would, probably not be an admirable mother because I'd be so at my wit's end. But she does a great job, getting the viewer to their wit's end. She has really good vocal skills. Let's just put that. I would not be able to speak for a very long time if I had to use my vocal skills in the same way she does. So I think that alone is a talent.
Yeah, and memorably for people who haven't seen that show, which once again, I have not seen it, but I've heard very good things about that show. You would recognize her once you see her here. You'll remember her from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And also, if you've seen the latest Scream movies, she's in those as well. She doesn't get set on fire in this movie, which she apparently gets set on fire previously multiple times in other films. And really an incredible performance, just technically. Her voice, to your point, there's a certain character she's channeling in this accent. The Brighton Beach is where this film is set. Once again, let's talk about the Sean Baker, the themes that he's very interested in. We have an immigrant community, which is Brighton Beach, which is right outside of Coney Island. Just seeing Coney Island, which is an amusement park, and seeing it in the winter where it's basically vacant is just a fascinating backdrop. And of course, if anybody who's seen Requiem for a Dream, you've also seen this milieu. And she is a second generation, apparently, Russian immigrant living in this Russian enclave outside of Coney Island. And she is a sex worker, right? She's not only a stripper, but we see that she does work outside the club as well. So once again, all themes that Baker is interested in. And it's the idea of like, what do you need to do when you live in this kind of tenuous in between, this netherworld in America, not the flashy rich, not the stereotypical middle class, working class. What are these more fringe cultures? Like, how do they survive? And we see her hustling, incredible work, like legitimately, you buy her completely as a stripper. And physically, very challenging role. Of course, she's very naked in this movie, has a lot of sex films. So if that's a turnoff, that could. I have to say, Celia, that I went to see this movie on a Sunday morning, I believe it was. There were very few people in the theater, mostly men. I think maybe exclusively men, actually. We were all spread out in this large theater. And
odd, because that is not my experience when I went into this movie. I'll tell you who I saw.
Yeah, I wanted to get that impression, but let me finish this part of that. I definitely want to hear that from you as well. The first 20 minutes of the film made me uncomfortable. You were basically, as the audience member, you're basically getting a lap dance for the first 20 minutes of this movie. It's like so in your face. And I started to get creeped out because I'm looking at all these guys around me going like, why are these guys here? Hey, wait a second. I'm one of those guys. So it started to like creep me out a little bit. Even though the audience was pretty empty, I actually thought that when the comedy kicks in, and there's a lot of comedy, the audience was busting out laughing. Like they were really enjoying the ride. So yeah, tell me about your experience of seeing.
I went in and there was quite a few senior citizens in the theater with me. Mm-hmm. What I was getting is the crowd, they looked like very intellectual senior citizen types is what I was surrounded by, which I found very strange because I've never been in a theater where that's, besides myself and Carlos, the only other people in the movie theater. So I thought that was odd. And first of all, they were really enjoying the comedy also. This movie's very, very funny. There are moments that are absolutely hilarious. It's like a lot of off-camera stuff, the commentary, so hilarious. So great direction there. It was almost like these people were intellectually involved with the movie. It's a very smart movie. Sure. But I did not have your crowd.
This was also older men, by the way. So I mentioned that they were mostly men in the audience, if not exclusively, but they were older. And to your point, I do think that is the crowd that is running out to see this initially, more high-end film goers who go to see a movie because it won the Cannes Film Festival Award, right? So that's why they're primarily showing up. I do wonder if this movie will succeed when it goes wide this weekend. I mean, it'll probably succeed because it'll get a lot of award recognition, so that'll draw an audience. But I don't know if it's going to cross over as a pop film because this older intellectual audience might be turned off by the sex, possibly. I'm not sure. But I can also see this film taking off. You think about how A24, this is not an A24 film, but you think about how A24 has marketed these high-end horror films. And once again, this is not a horror film either, but they've marketed to this niche of young film goers that love this kind of energy in a movie, like a Midsommar or something like that, right? They make it like an event to go see it. And this movie could definitely appeal to that audience, but I'm not sure they're showing up yet. But I do hope that it does cross over because I think a younger audience, like kids who can relate to being stuck in hustle culture or being marketed to all the time as like, you got to hustle, you got to watch this film. And that's literally what this film is about. So I think it will appeal to them if they show up.
It would also appeal to people who are, we'll get into the spoilers later, but who are possible idealist romantics.
That's interesting too, because I think you can split this movie right down the middle. And there are two versions of the American dream, two versions of romance, right? And they're very much being delineated by the first half and the second half of the film. So I'm curious to even know what you're saying with the romantic aspects of this film.
Well, I mean, when you start watching the movie, and even Carlos was like, is this Pretty Woman in 2024? It starts to read like that a bit, because if you know the plot of Pretty Woman, you realize she's also a sex worker. Right. And then she is being paid to spend, I think it was a week with Richard Gere, who's this very wealthy man.
To reinforce what you're saying, that dialogue is from Pretty Woman. When he goes, I want you to be my girlfriend. And he says 10,000 and she says 15. And he goes, I wouldn't have taken anything under 30. That's from Pretty Woman. So that is explicitly them winking at your connection.
So there's that. But then there's parts of it that also go back to some romantic situations. I really bought in the beginning of the movie that this was going to be a love story. Let me know when you want me to tell you what my theory was of what this movie was going to be about. Maybe 40 minutes in. I was wrong, by the way.
Right.
But I did have this theory of what was happening, and I was hoping it wasn't true, and it wasn't.
Yeah, so let's finish up the general recommendations section, and then we can go and start talking about some plot details. Once again, I think I'd say anything that happens in the first half of the film, don't tease what happens at the end, but the first half of the film is pretty much in the trailer, including that really, I mean, that's what's so funny about it. There is this wildly romantic moment in the middle of the film, which turns out like, even as it's happening, this is probably bullshit, right? But it is a blast. It captures this blissful, mindless Vegas fantasy and romantic fantasy as well. And it is so fun.
I did not think it was,
because you knew a shoe was going to drop.
I was not thinking the shoe was going to drop the way it dropped. I know obviously the shoe is going to drop somewhere, but not the way it dropped from watching the movie up to the point you're speaking of. When I started watching the movie, I guess up until about halfway, I was like, I love both of these people. I love this boy. I love this girl. I love them together.
Let's talk a little bit. Let's talk a little bit of what you're talking about when you say that. So we have Anora, which I mentioned before. She's like a second generation Russian immigrant or from an immigrant family. She speaks Russian, not great. She's the only one who speaks Russian at this particular strip club near Brighton Beach. So she might be in Manhattan in that particular club. I don't remember actually. So at that point, they have some Russian rich guy is there. Turns out to be a very young guy. Most of the guys that she's dancing for, and when you see that montage early on, are all older men. And tell me what you think about that. I really love that sequence at the beginning. It's not only, you see later on that she has this escape when she is doing the date thing, the pretty woman thing with this particular kid, this Russian kid who shows up and asks to be with her. And then he asks, will you come go on a date with me outside of the club? And of course that's sex. And then New Year's party together. And then eventually they spend a week together. But before then, we have this opening sequence where you see her working, right? Like there is nothing, I should say there's nothing pleasurable about it. There is something pleasurable about it. She has a camaraderie with the girls. She seems to be like laughing at some points or reacting to things. And it's a job for her though, right? But she works. She's working late nights, crashing with her sister. She lives with her sister and she's crashing at the end of the night. And it's like, it's a tough gig, right? But she is not doing this to feed a drug habit or something. She never sits down and does the whole stereotypical, I'm saving up to go to college or I'm saving up to buy a business. She definitely seems to be like, she has a plan for her future.
I feel that she has just accepted that this is her job and she's grateful that she looks a certain way and this is the type of job that she can do while still knowing she is this beautiful, desirable person. I mean, there is a high that comes with that. She makes the most of this. The people she's dancing for seem mostly respectful and she's in control of the situation. Right. So I don't feel like she's being victimized. I feel like she's in control of the situation. And, if she needs to make a living like this now while she looks the way she does, whatever her reasons are, she's doing a really good job of everyone's in a good mood. No one feels they're in a position where they're being taken advantage of. Even her boss is, whatever, kind of like, you're going to be gone for a week. And she does mention to him, like, until you are paying for my health insurance and my 401k, you can't really tell me what to do. And I'm doing what I want to do. She's not in a position where she is being threatened to behave a certain way. All of this is on her own terms. So it doesn't feel creepy.
Plus, she has a work ethic. I'm sure she makes money for them, right? She probably earns a lot. But you see, even in that montage, it's not like she's taking long breaks. She takes a cigarette break here and there. But aside from that, it's like she's doing the private dances, and you see her the very next scene, private dance, private dance, private dance. She's always working her way towards another private dance, which A, is making her a lot of money, but B, is making the club a lot of money too, because they split the money with the club, right? Obviously, if she wants to take a week off, but she's making more money than all the other girls, they could care less. And like you said, they're not going to give her unemployment benefits or so he doesn't have much control over saying what she can and cannot do.
When you're watching
Yes.
the sex scenes in the beginning, I didn't feel uncomfortable or creeped out in any way. I was just observing like her performance, really, because I thought she was so great. It's really her doing all that, not like Flashdance where they have somebody step in and do the dance sequences. Some of the stuff she was doing, I'm curious, was that her? Very athletic. So I was more enthralled by her. Honestly, I fell in love with her. I thought she was amazing in every way. Like I wanted good things to happen for her. Right. So I wasn't feeling creeped out. She wasn't being controlled. Everything she did was a decision that she made all the way through. And then you see later that there's no way you're going to tell this girl what to do. You know, she doesn't want to do something, she's not going to do it. So
we got to talk about that later.
At all. Like that's not going to happen. Very admirable. That's the job where she can make the most money at this point in her life. And so why not take advantage of it? And she seems to have a good relationship with everyone that she works with. She's got
that one girl, though, that one tall girl who's like, did you date with my guy?
Yeah, but she doesn't hate that girl. She just kind of tolerates her. And I mean, this girl does not have hate in her heart. You know, she's not hard and bitter. She is really lovable.
She's uncouth and she is, not a stereotypical heroine, but we definitely root for her for sure. And then she, as we mentioned, she meets this boy. He turns out to have a very rich billionaire oligarch Russian dad and all the baggage that probably goes along with that, probably mob connections, probably Putin connections. That's how most of these people get their money. But he lives in this massive mansion and she goes to a New Year's Eve party there and they kind of start a relationship. And there is, I think you mentioned this, that you have this sense that maybe this is going to work out for her, or maybe this will turn into some kind of romance. And you root for both of them, right? Like you kind of empathize with this kid who probably is a spoiled brat, but maybe he's made a real love connection with this girl.
Totally. I thought he really loved her, or he thought he did. I was rooting for both of them.
And that's the fantasy part of the film, right? All of that is just the in my notes, I wrote down that, I don't know if you've ever heard, the best thing The Weeknd ever did was his first mixtape called House of Balloons from over 10 years ago at this point, when he was only 19 years old, I think. That whole first half of the album is, just strippers and drugs and sex and scary things happening, basically, but like this kind of wild fantasy of excess. And then the second half, there's literally a song called The Come Down. And then the second half of that mixtape is all the come down, like all the consequences of all those things. And I'm like, to a large extent, that is kind of the pattern of this film as well.
I still think it wasn't as dour.
Yes, that's a good point. Yes, absolutely. Like my analogy to the Weeknd album, yes, which it gets dark, like very dark, where there's always maybe a shred of optimism throughout. It never gets that bleak. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that even the stereotypical gangster or bad guys, they are in a large way trapped in their jobs as well. And they are just trying to hustle and make a living, and they're empathetic in their own way. So they empathize. Like they could care less about Anora, by the way, but at the same time, they don't necessarily want to hurt her because they know they're all in the same boat together. They're all trying to desperately scrape and perform for this billionaire so they can get a couple of scraps of his money. And they need this job. They need it to support their families. They need it to get by. And it is, once again, they've accepted the fact that this is the job they do, whether they have morally compromised themselves or not. So there is that level of empathy for everybody in the film.
I think it's also funny that like they're all very different. So their views on what's happening have different, they're different views, but they all have the same base view that this kid is such a pain in the butt.
Right.
And now they have to go and fix this problem. Like they're amused.
Which apparently he's done before, by the way.
Yeah. So they're fairly amused when they find out like what he's done this time. I mean, they're chuckling in the car. One guy's like, over it. He's not laughing. But I mean, it's kind of funny.
Well, the one guy who does FaceTime with the family and knows that there could be significant consequences for him is not enjoying this at all. And then, so I think this is probably in the trailer, but let's just say they run off together and maybe we'll talk about one more thing. If you want no spoilers, then drop off the conversation now. But I think we could talk about one more thing before we get into the full spoiler warning, because I think this is all in the trailer. They have this whirlwind romance. It really feels romantic. It's really kind of beautiful. I agree with you. I bought into it like this kid's a loser, but maybe they, in a way, they're simpatico in some way. And I love, by the way, this is the scene I want to talk about before we go to that next part of the conversation. I love the sequence. It's one of my favorite things. I just talked about Conclave on the podcast here, reviewing it, and another film where you know that people are thinking and you see them thinking on screen. You see them doing a calculation in their head and you don't have to hear any dialogue. You know what they're thinking. And there's this great scene where he is proposing to her. And you know, in some ways, this is an FU to his family, or maybe just a way to stay in the US. So there's a calculation going on his. And then she is like, is this guy messing with me? Could this possibly work out? And you see her doing that calculation. So I just love the fact that there is just, you see these two characters negotiating and it's all like happening inside their heads. What do you think her calculation is at that moment?
First of all, she really wants true love. I believe she really loves him, or believes she loves him. Maybe she does, because she was, as we go on through the story, I think she loved him. He could be her savior. Not only is this guy possibly going to marry her and save her from this, work that she has to do, maybe she could have a traditional family and just realize whatever dreams, the American dream, maybe, because she's in America. It's almost too good to be true, though. I see her thinking that, like, right. Not only is she going to be saved from, having to do sex work, but she is going to be really wealthy also. Of course. And not just get the main thing she wants, which is maybe have a family, do something else with her life without having to be strapped for money, but she gets to have more money than she's ever dreamed of. Like, it seems too good to be true. And I could see that on her face, because when I think something's too good to be true, it always has been, by the way. So I'm very leery about it. But I also don't think she wanted to be disappointed by him. Sure. Because if she's going to take this seriously, then is he taking it seriously? So yeah, you could see them thinking all this.
I read it differently, which is totally fine. I think that's what's good about having ambiguity. I read it as in, I don't think she was in love with this guy, but maybe she's thinking, I could make this work. And if they're actually married, you see her reaction to, like, I am like a co-owner now on this house or whatever. She has this real chip on her shoulder later on. I think she really felt like, well, if he really marries me, well, then I have leverage. Even if this all goes badly, I still have this huge amount of leverage. If they have a kid together and the whole thing falls apart, she's still wealthy for the rest of her life. So it is this shortcut out of her circumstance, right? And I think she's calculating all of this, but I don't think she dislikes him. I don't think she sees him as a mark. The only thing I disagree slightly with what you said is, I'm not sure if she's really falling in love with him. She's really saying, like, is he in love with me? Because if that's the case, I can make this work.
I feel like she does love him, because there are points when we go into spoilers where she does look desperate to hold on to the situation that is, obviously going to benefit her.
Is it something else?
I don't think it's real love, but she's young and he's young. And when you're that age, it might feel like it is. So I feel like she is convincing herself that it is. She's also practical. Yeah. But the reason I feel like she was actually in love with him, she does state to him, like, don't mess with me. Are you being serious?
Right.
And she's willing to take him at his word. And there are moments there where she's trying to reason with him, believing that, maybe he's inebriated and he's not thinking clearly. So I don't think she was only thinking of this in practical ways. I think she was, in the fantasy. She allowed herself to be in this fantasy where she at least believes that she's in love with this guy and that he's also in love with her.
I do think she looks at him and is questioning his intentions at that moment, because she sees him as kind of a kid. She's 23, by the way. He's 21, which isn't a huge difference. But I think she
I
knows
think
full
she's
well.
25, right? She said 25.
No, he says 25 and she gets offended and says 23. But
Oh,
she's like, are you old? Like 25? But no, it's 23. I laugh at the idea that 25 is old. But yeah, I think she looks at him as kind of a kid because, yeah, she may only be 23, but look at her life and look at how hardened she is and how resilient she is. You know, we'll get to what happens in the next few scenes, but she obviously has been through stuff in her life and has some degree of self-preservation and toughness that he obviously does not have. She looks at him as like, this is a completely pampered little kid. And she's absolutely right. But she thinks, hey, that could be for my benefit as well.
with everything you just said, I still think she buys in. This could work. He really has feelings for me. I love this lifestyle. This kid could be someone that I could spend the rest of my life with. I think she buys in, which is why at the end, her dreams come crashing. And that's very sad. But I think mainly it's because she has allowed herself to believe that this is real. I don't think she thinks it's fake. I think she did her math and then decided to buy in and then just went with that for the rest of the movie. Because why is she so broken up? Like if I'm in a practical situation and I'm not emotionally involved to a certain degree, I'm not going to have the kind of reactions that she was having.
And that's where I disagree with you. All right, so we're going to go full spoilers at this point because I think we're going to have to start talking about the ending versus the beginning. I also want to talk about some really funny and crazy things that happen along the way. So we're going to go spoilers now. It'll get worse as we go forward, but I don't want to spoil anything for people. Even some of the things I'm about to say are probably right in the trailer, but I just don't like spoiling things. So spoilers from this point on.
I like to go in knowing barely anything, and that's what I did. Right. This is why I was thrown off in certain parts, but I like that.
What you were talking about, how she reacts to that circumstance as things start falling apart. And just to make it explicit in the plot itself, they have run off to Vegas. There's an extremely an interesting kind of romance. It is extremely romantic, but they are basically high the entire time. But so simultaneously, two things. It is wildly romantic. This is an incredible scene. If you've ever been to Vegas, in the old part of the old city of Vegas, there is a street that is covered with a giant LED screen and they have like a fireworks display and they show like giant movies above you as you walk through it. It's like a whole city street. It's a really impressive piece of engineering. I think this is like run and gun. These are people that they're running into that did not know they were in a movie and they're just running around dressed for the wedding and they've gotten married and they're just celebrating it. And it is so wildly romantic. I agree. Like this is the whole part of the film that is the fantasy of what this could possibly be. And it's all going to come crashing down eventually, but not yet. And then during this period of time, we really don't know when because we don't actually see this particular event. But apparently he's so famous back in Russia because his dad is so rich and so connected. He took this girl to an NBA game. They got pictures of her. It ended up in one of these Russian tabloid newspapers. And they had tracked her down. They knew that she was a sex worker. They keep calling her a prostitute or a whore. And she's furious about this. She's like, I'm an exotic dancer. But and then when they hear about this, three guys show up and it turns out we have this one big guy who's really kind of like the pussycat among the group. There's this buzz-cutted tough guy who gets brought along by the big guy because he really wants him to be the muscle. He seems to be a little more much of a tough guy, although he turns out to be a pussycat in his own sort of way. Although he is the muscle, he's the one who actually does the stuff that needs to get done across the board. It's
awesome because he has no muscles.
Right. And then, of course, you have this caretaker who's supposed to be watching the son. The son, by the way, we discover over time, this young Russian guy what's his name? Nikita or Ivan, I call him. They have a couple of names they call him. And then there's his handler or his godfather potentially, which is hilarious because he lives nearby in Brighton Beach. Everyone's terrified of this guy. He's the one who's like the wild card, but he's this older guy and he is literally at his grandchild's baptism. And going back to the idea of like how you write a biography for each one of these people when you meet them, just this guy who he's like in the middle of the baptism and he can't let it go. He's like, he reads the text message, and he puts the phone back in his pocket. And then like 5 minutes later, he's like, I got to get out of here. That like right away, it's just eating away at him. He's like, I can't wait 10 minutes. I can't wait half an hour. I got to go right now. He goes there to micromanage. And then there's this repeated gag where They try to control her, to your point of like, she is like a wild person. Oh, by the way, he's there. The young guy, the now husband, is there with her. As soon as they show up, he half dressed, runs out into the snow, terrified because his parents are on the way home, leaves Anora behind. And she, of course, is insulted by that, but then also insulted that these guys are inside of her house. She's married now. And then everything starts to be revealed, right? She starts to realize that she has more limited options than she thought. She thought, I'm in my husband's house. How can you come in here? I'm going to call the police and have you kicked out of here. And they're going to be like, you're the interloper. Even if you're married to him, this isn't his house. What are you talking about? And she, of course, was not expecting any of these. So maybe in some ways more naive, or maybe buying into the fantasy a little bit more than she should have. But she is like a wild animal, like a caged animal. And she beats up these guys, and they're trying to not be too tough with them. And it's so funny that each time one of the guys comes in and he's like saying like, we got to untie her. Why are you doing that? And then she, basically lashes out at that person, destroys this house, which is probably like the furniture that she breaks, this glass table, etc., are probably worth tens of thousands of dollars a piece. All of this is very funny. And then, of course, that older guy shows up and he's like, why is she tied up? Why are you holding on to her? Let her go. And you're like, don't let her go. Don't untie her. All of this is very, very funny. And it's so protracted. Like, when the next guy shows up, he's going to make all the same mistakes again.
Yeah, she has a lot of energy.
Yes.
It's amazing.
She's in great shape, right? She's got to work hard. So she's, think about the workout that is to have that job.
Oh, no, I couldn't do that. I would have needed a break. I'd be like, okay, can we just, come back in 10 minutes? Like, I'd be out of breath.
Yeah, hours of that every day.
But don't you think that she, being a realist, understands that this situation is not going to be in her favor unless she fights for it, and that she believes that her husband is going to fight for it too? I feel like that's what she's thinking. I am going to have to, help him fight for this. So she's fighting even harder.
Well, for me, watching the film, when these guys show up, and I'm doing the calculus too, being like, this is probably not this kid's house. Like, this kid doesn't have this kind of wealth or whatever, that this is all an illusion. And I'm doing that calculation. She's honestly thinking like she's very much like an American person who's like, I'm married to the person who owns this house. Therefore, this house is now mine. Therefore, you guys are inside my house. I don't think she's ready to hear the truth of it, right? It hits her pretty hard because, of course, she realizes that's why her husband ran away. Why would her husband run away from his own house when, you know what I mean? And because it's not, right? He's an interloper in a way as well. His parents are like, you're supposed to be in college right now. What the hell are you doing? And she's 23 years old. I think she bought into the fantasy and she thought.
I think she's smart. Like, if I'm her and the only power I have left is make my husband stand up for the situation for me, I'm going to do what she did. Probably not as athletically, but it's the only power I have. How is me giving in to these bullies who come into my house and tell me what I should be doing, or that I have to annul a marriage? How is that going to help me? The only hope I have is to find this kid I married and have him stand up for me and have him say, no, that's not right, and I'm not going to stand for it. I
do think she had feelings for this guy. If she was repulsed by him, if she thought he was abusive, she would not have taken this deal, even if it was going to make her rich. I disagree a little bit with how much of this is more considering the financial lifestyle changes, obviously. And, she's not in a situation she loves either, I'm sure. So I think that that's more of what she's trying to fight for rather than the relationship. And the reason I point that out is, and once again, we're now in full spoilers, the first half of this movie is very, very high energy. People have described it as Pretty Woman meets Uncut Gems. And yeah, the first half of the film is in that tone. However, once you get past the midpoint and she's basically in the car with those goons, the tempo is very different. There is half an hour of this movie, which is them driving around in this car trying to track him down. And the reason I mentioned that is that there are no show-stopping moments in that segment of the film. This is the come down. And the reason I think that part of the movie is so long is that her illusions as to what were happening are coming down, right? It's her realization that what this kid is really about, how powerful this family that she's in, and like basically that all the assumptions she made are being dismantled the longer she is with them. And of course, we see it in the way she fights and fights and fights. And then she's at least combative. And then in the end, these guys are like throwing a blanket on her and stuff and being her only friends by the end of the night because she realizes all of this was an illusion, right? And that is that whole half hour of the film. That's why it's there.
I agree and disagree with you. I'm holding on to my,
Sure.
she bought into this fantasy love match thing, like, oh, they found each other. What are the chances? To the crazy, reaction when they invade her space.
Sure.
And I think she's still fighting for this guy, even though he ran away. She's still holding out hope that, he really cares about her. And yes, when it becomes this situation where it is dismantling, you are correct. That's a good word, actually. She still is holding out hope that,
Sure. Mm-hmm.
yeah, he's immature. Yes, he ran away. Yes, he's a child. He doesn't know any better. I just have to make him see the truth, and the truth is what she believes is this love situation. And of course, she is being practical, and I think she's a smart character. She understands what she's about to lose. She pivots, behaves in different ways because now she has to locate him. She becomes practical. Like, okay, he's gone, so we have to locate him. Even if in her head she's thinking, I don't know if the emotions that I was in a spell or something, if those were all real. But now what I have is this child that I have to find in order to save what I can from this situation. And I think she's an idealist. Like maybe in the end, once she does find him, looks him in the eye and makes him choose her or not, she still thinks he's going to choose her, which is why she keeps fighting.
One of the things that I think contradicts part of what you're saying in the structure of the film, not in your definition of the character, which I think is a valid read, we have to talk about the fact that Igor is here as well. So this is the blonde guy who shows up with the buzz cut. I've never seen this Russian actor before, but he's really good in this, by the way. And immediately when he meets her, he's like in love with her the second he sees her, right? And it's such a weird energy in the film. You're like, what is this guy doing in the movie? Because I think even when he shows up, that I still do think, and maybe this was what you're saying, the read you expected 40 minutes in, and maybe you can clarify that a little bit. I still expected what you were describing. She's going to be like flying all over the country, fighting for her man or, to make this thing work. And that romantic beat in the middle of the film is going to like carry out towards the end. That's what I thought was going to happen. So introducing this guy, I was just like, wait a second, what's going on between these two? Are they going to end up together? Because the language of the show, of the film, was that, right? And that's basically what starts to happen. I'm not saying they're going to end up together, but what you start to see is he is sympathetic to her. He's not some kind of brute. As she ends up relying on him to a large extent. And let's not talk about the very end yet. Little by little, and they're also spending this time together, she is softening towards him. This is what I was going to say about the duality of romance in the film. Their scenes together are very romantic, but in a very, very different version of romance than we see when she's with in the fantasy version of romance, right?
Well, I feel like he and her have a lot more in common.
Absolutely, right.
Than she does with her husband.
Right.
So he understands her. I think part of the reason it looks like he's in love with her the second he walks in the house is when they find out this child has gone and done this crazy thing, married, a stripper. And another thing I want to bring up, is she a sex worker? Exactly. I don't feel like she's going to many people's houses to perform sex. I feel like when she goes to his house to have sex with him, she knows that's what's going to happen. But I feel like she's not doing this, maybe has never even done this previous to this.
I'm pretty sure she's pretty comfortable with it. I think she's done this before. I don't think that she is primarily doing that, but she definitely has her side business, I think.
I wasn't convinced about that. She does seem very comfortable, though, to your point, actually. Anyway, I feel like when they break into the house and they have this preconception of who he has married, and when they get there, she's not what he expected, and he's very interested in her like right away. I feel like he could see things in her because they are in much more similar circumstances than other people in the movie are. So I feel like he respects her immediately, and he feels sorry for her because she doesn't know what a disaster this kid is.
Right.
She has no idea.
All right, now let's talk about the very end of the film. So they spend the whole entire night trying to find this kid. They eventually find him at her club. They should have actually started there to a large extent, rather than wasting all that time. And he's been there all night long, just waiting to be discovered. Indeed, the next morning, they show up. His parents show up. Hilarious, by the way, that they take him to New York City to have his the annulment. The whole thing is we got to get him in the morning. We got to see the judge at 6:00 in the morning. They're going to open early to do this annulment. And they're like, he got married in Vegas.
They spend the night
he got
in
married
the car.
In Vegas. He wasn't married in New York. He can't get annulled here. That's hilarious. Like, what a waste of time.
It was the whole night. They're like sitting there waiting for them to, someone to show up to do this immediately.
The parents do show up in a private jet, and they're like, we're getting on the jet right now, and we're flying to Vegas. Fascinating to see the mother. You do wonder, like, what is this very plastic looking person, but also maybe the engine that makes that whole entire family run, the most vicious of them all. I mean, even the husband seems to have kowtowed to her whims. And although she still babies her son. And I do wonder, and I'm curious about this, your interpretation of this as well. Do you think that the son did this to get their attention? What do you think his motivations are?
I think he is a complete idiot, the son. I feel like he, is trying to exert some kind of independence the way, kids try to push their boundaries when they're teenagers. I feel like he doesn't care. He went off, he met a stripper, he asked her to come over, he decided he was going to marry her. And maybe he's trying to push their buttons a little bit because they're saying he has to go work for them immediately, for example. So he wants to get his rocks off before he has to have any real responsibility.
Right.
I don't know if he is doing it tactically. I don't know if he's like, I'm going to go and do all these things to piss off my parents. I feel like he's like, I'm going to do all these things because I feel like doing them before I have to be responsible. And then he just lets things spiral without any kind of forethought. And then all of a sudden, his parents are coming to reprimand him and make him do what they want him to do. And he freaks out because he's going to do what they want him to do. He has no other options. Everything is theirs.
Well, yeah, once again, I think that I have a different impression of it, and I'm not disagreeing with you, actually. I like the fact that the film can be read in multiple ways. When that moment comes when she's just with him on the tarmac, telling him not to get on the plane, and he turns to her and is like, come on, like, what are we talking about here? Like, just that annoyance with her at that moment. I think that's when his mask drops to a large extent. And this has all been because like 2 minutes earlier, he's like, ooh, I'm so high still. And then he looks at her and is like, come on, Anora, like this was going to happen. What are you talking about? That's the moment in watching the film where I'm like, was this all a ruse where he wants to be back with mommy and daddy? He had no responsibilities, probably just, doing exactly this lifestyle in Russia. And his parents are like, you're going to go to America, you're going to go to college. And he's like, I don't want to go to college. I just want to play video games and have sex and do drugs. And that's it. Now he's going back to Russia. And his dad's like saying like, it's not going to be like last time. You're going to have to work. And he's just like, whatever, maybe.
I don't find him to be that much of a manipulative genius. I think he's more whimsical. He would have to have a long game in order for him to be in the position that you're describing. I think he whimsically does things. He gets completely carried away. He's drunk or high all the time. He's just trying to make himself happy that minute. And he's not thinking logically. I don't see this kid as having a long game. And I think he's like, oh, I got to start working soon. I better have a really good time. Oh my God, I'm having a really good time. And I met this really cool stripper and she's so hot. And
but that's like, what, but really, isn't that exactly isn't that exactly what he says to her? He goes, thanks for making my last week here so much fun. Isn't that like explicitly what he's saying?
Away though. I think he didn't have to marry her. I think he got carried away. He just
but that's the thing is like you said, I totally agree. That's the part that I think is like the dig at his parents, where if he had just done this and then flown to Russia, at the end of the week, what he was supposed to, I don't think there wouldn't be all this hoopla. The part where he's like trying to get his parents' attention is exactly that. Him marrying her was the slap in the face to his mother, right? Which was, I think, what he was trying to incite a reaction.
He seems pretty terrified that they found out about it. He's like, what do you mean they're coming here? Maybe in his crazy mind, he actually thought like, maybe this will work out. Maybe I could have a hot wife for a little bit and then get divorced or something. Or who knows if he even thought that far. I don't think he thinks ahead. I think he just behaves in the moment. I mean, I get where you're coming from. And at the end, he is pretty annoyed at her. But I feel like he's annoyed at her because it's over now. Stop hanging on.
I agree. I can read it that way also. It just made me think that there's possibly, he obviously is trying to antagonize his parents, right? Like we hear that explicitly that he does this. The getting married part, whether the romance was real. And that's the other thing, by the way. I do believe part of what you're saying in the fact that he definitely got caught up in the moment. Maybe for a second, he's like, well, maybe this will work out, but I don't ever feel like he was like, I'm going to fight for this girl. He's like, well, whatever.
Well, I didn't know that. You should see what my read was on this movie, which is not what happened.
Right. Tell me what you thought.
So here's what I thought. I'm watching this. I'm like, oh my God, I love these two. I hope nothing bad happens to them. And then, all these things happen that we talk about. You're going to have to cut out my choke. Anyway. Okay. All these things happen all of a sudden, like it's over. But here's what I think is going to happen. The parents are coming. I am going to not divorce her. I really do love her, no matter how ridiculous this seems to everyone. I'm going to keep her as my wife. I'm going to fight for her. And then all the goons that, trying to calm her down and she's going crazy are like, oh no, now we have to kill her.
Well, that was dark. That is very dark.
Not gonna divorce her. And that guy who's in love with her when he first walks in and is like, I'm sorry about this, is I really like this girl. I don't want to have to kill her. And that's part of what's going on in his head. Not so much like, oh, I really love this girl. Like, what is it about her? I was thinking he's like, I really like this girl. I don't want to have to kill her. But, he's not going to give her up. She's not going to give up clearly. So we'll just have to. And then at the end, it becomes this really awful situation where they have to get rid of her in some way. And then this delusional kid is now going to be heartbroken. So for like 10 minutes, I thought that's what was going to happen. And I realized that's not at all where this is going. It's not that dark.
Yeah, I never anticipated that just because the tone was so goofy when they showed up. Initially, when the goons are like rolling up, I'm like, oh my God, is this going to take a really dark turn? But then when it became so slapstick, I'm like, no, this is like, these guys are out of their depth too. Everybody's out of their depth in this situation, right?
But I thought the movie was going to somehow turn this slapstick situation around and then have it end in a really dour way, which would have been an interesting thing to happen also. I'm glad it turned out the way it did because it's much more original.
I also think it's naturalistic. The simple fact is, like, it's like the mother on the tarmac. She says, and here's where I think she miscalculated, by the way. On the tarmac, she says, I'm not going to go with you on the plane. And she says, yes, you are. And she's like, well, I won't get divorced. And then I'll say, he's my husband. And you're going to have to pay me out. You're going to have to give me X% of your, and think about it. These people like live in Russia. Like they don't even have to show up to these court hearings if they don't want to. So all of that is a fantasy also. The son probably doesn't have any money at all. It's probably all the father's money, right? The mom's more interested in the reputation. And she realizes that, right? Like, think about it. These Russian people are not going to fly in from Russia to attend court hearings in New York. If they don't attend, what's going to happen to them? You get a fee, a fine or something, they'll pay it. They're billionaires. And not only that, if she like goes to the media and makes us think about it, they're like, we're going to go to the media because we own newspapers and stuff. We're going to ruin your life. We're going to destroy your relationship with everybody. Do you own that house with your sister? We're going to take that house. Even if we lose one of these cases, we'll take 10 years. And by the end of that, you're going to be penniless and living on the streets, right? And she's smart enough to be like, yeah, I can't win this legally. Where she miscalculated, and I was anticipating this, she would be like, I'll get on that plane. I'm going to sign the papers. I'll talk to your journalists. If one of these Russian newspapers show up at my house, I'll talk to them and say it was all a big prank and we were just goofing around. And I'll be like the nicest. You give me $500,000 right now. And you know what? They would have paid her. So that's where I think she made a mistake.
Yes, but I think she was more love invested than monetarily invested. That's why I don't think
She's an exotic dancer. Even if she was love invested, she would take the money and run.
I understand, but she could be an exotic dancer and still have this romantic part. She's practical, but I think she's more romantic than you're giving her credit for.
Yeah, I think you bought into the romance more than I did. But
I definitely did. Yeah.
But there's another romance we got to talk about here as well. So the alternate romance here is her relationship with Igor. In a way, by the way, even her dumping that mink coat at the clerk's office in Las Vegas, she's giving away something that's probably cost tens of thousands of dollars right there. So that I didn't read it as her being committed to the romance, because at that point, the romance is obviously over. So she could be more practical. I think at that point, she's like, I'm not going to sell myself to these people. Like, she is disgusted by them. And she's disgusted by the son at this point too. Like, the dad is laughing it up and the mom loves it when she's dunking on the son at the end. They're like, ha ha ha, see? Even she says it. That whole family dynamic is really, really toxic, by the way. And then she flies back without her mink coat, and Igor is there watching her, still making sure that she is complying. She gets only $10,000 payout, which she takes, by the way. So she did take a $10,000 payout for the supposed, marriage cost fee. And he covers her with his jacket. They fly back home. They spend the night together, one last night in that big mansion. She calls him, some homosexual slurs, and is still trying to dominate him in some ways, throwing him the blanket, sleeping in the luxurious, in the big luxurious bedroom. And he takes it all and kind of appreciates her. And this is where I was saying this is like this very low key romantic section at the end. And of course, this all culminates with him dropping her off. She's back in the house, just like at the very beginning of the film. We've come full circle. She's come fully back down to earth. And he pulls out the ring, which is a 4-carat diamond ring, which is probably worth a lot of money, by the way. And he, who also doesn't have a lot of money, is handing it to her. That gesture is really beautiful. It's snowing. It's really beautifully photographed. He even takes her bags and carries them up the stairs and then gets back in the car. And then we got to talk about this, because then she has sex with him. And at first I'm like, oh, don't ruin this. Like, she's going to make this transactional, right? I was a little upset, but then that final moment is so complex because yes, she's trying to make it transactional. You gave me the ring and now I'm paying you back. But then she does want to have sex with him. She gets aroused. And then when she is actually enjoying it, she gets mad at him. And I do wonder about what that means. Is that because this is the best she can do? Is she angry at herself? Is she angry at him? I mean, he was one of her abusers in a lot of ways. So it's very complex what's going on there.
That is not what I saw.
Okay. So I definitely want to read that. It's an incredible performance. She goes through 4 or 5 different emotions there in those last moments.
Oh, definitely. So what I read is, first of all, when she throws him that blanket, I think she's being kind. She's going to go upstairs, obviously, sleep in that room, and he's not going to come up. Okay, obviously. But let me give him a blanket so he's more comfortable. That's all I was reading there. Well, I didn't see her as being like, look at me, I get to sleep in this room while you get to sleep on a couch, because I assume that that's what's going to happen anyway. I assume they both know that's kind of the deal, right. But she throws him a blanket. I think she likes him.
Well, yeah, obviously she's calling him a rapist to his face, and he's just like, but the reason I say that, I'm saying that she obviously does not consider him a rapist. She's like, you would have raped. It's what she's saying is nonsensical. She's saying, oh, when you were there, I know you wanted to rape me. And he doesn't say this to her, but he's just saying, if I was a rapist, we're alone in this house together right now. I'm obviously not a rapist.
I don't think she thinks he's a rapist. I think she was just kind of.
She's just attacking him. Yeah.
When you like someone in second grade and you pull their hair, or
yes,
you just do these things that are weirdly annoying just because you want to talk to them, and it's just this ridiculous thing to do. I feel like she's kind of I like him, but I'm not going to give him the satisfaction, and I'm really not in the headspace to be liking anyone, so I'll just say mean things to him that he's not going to take seriously.
So tell me your read on what's happening there in the final moments in the car.
I feel like she likes this guy. She feels rejected big time by someone that she trusted stupidly. And she wants to get, some of her mojo. I mean, he likes her. It would be an ego booster at this moment because it's a very low moment. So she does that. Also kind of having power over him. I mean,
Yeah.
she's been in a situation where she really doesn't have any power for like a couple days now. But then she really does start to enjoy it, as
Right.
you were saying before. And I think there's a moment there when, she climaxes.
Or she gets
Um,
close, I think, at least. Yeah.
something. This pisses her off. So she smacks
Yes.
him because he made her feel something. And that
Yes.
is not really what she was going for in this moment.
Right.
And I
Right.
think all of a sudden she sees him and she sees that he also sees her in an intimate way.
He's like holding her face, right? They make the intense eye contact during that moment.
Yeah, I feel like she is seen by him finally, by someone in
By
all
someone,
this
yes.
mess.
Mm-hmm.
She breaks down, like finally. That energy that she's been having this entire time just comes out in grief. That's
Yes.
what it feels like.
No, I agree. I agree with everything you just said, including when she climbs on top of him. She's trying to separate herself from this as a kind gesture from him, the way she has in the past, right? She's trying to detach herself and using the sex as a way to separate herself from it. And instead, like you said, she gets into it and then she's upset about that. And then you have that final moment. And then she can just be vulnerable in front of him. She probably, once again, didn't intend that at all. It's part of the reason she's upset about it. But it is very emotionally cathartic because you just, she's been through the ringer for sure in this past week or so. I mean, think about it. It's not only the past couple of days and all that activity. It is the come down, right? It's that regardless of what her intentions were at the beginning, she was on an all-time high and she has come down. She's just back to status quo, right? That's a big come down, right? Like it's very different when you were so close to, in your mind, thinking you were like a millionaire, and now you're going to be back up doing the grind again tomorrow.
I think it's more than that. I feel like when you have to be strong all the time, constantly, it is cathartic to just not have to be strong for 25 minutes or so or whatever. That's why sometimes having a good cry feels very cleansing. I feel like I always have to be strong all the time. I can't show weakness. I can't not do certain things. And I'm not even talking about people who have real situations where they need to be like that and not show weakness. So can you imagine being a person who can't show any weakness and all of a sudden you have this moment where you just have that good cry and then start over like a reset? I feel like she was doing that. I've been there, so I saw that.
The reason I say the movie almost has these two parallel scenes, these romantic scenes, and I was saying that I think for me, the most interesting structure to it is that wildly romantic, really maybe the highlight of the whole film when they're in that LED lit street, right after they've been married, and the fantasy of that. And this is like another truly romantic moment in the film, but a very practical one, but nonetheless, really wildly romantic in its own way for the reasons you say. The entire time, even during the fantasy, even whenever she's having sex with her, husband momentarily, even during all those periods of time, it's such a performance all the time. And this is the one time in the entire film where she can let down her guard. Like even when she's yelling at him in Vegas, all of those scenes, even when she's talking to the mother, everything, like you said, it's some version of a performance. She has to have her guard up all the time. And this is the one time she can be vulnerable. And in a way, it's the most romantic thing that could happen at that moment. I don't know if they end up together or not. Do you have any, what do you think happens the next day beyond this point?
I don't think they can end up together.
Right.
It's too much. My assumption is that they're not even going to keep in touch. I feel like it's someone she's going to think about, or he will think about her as they go through life. But how would they make that work? Would he have to leave his country and his family behind?
He lives near,
Could he?
He's right down the street. I mean, not down the street, but he's within
with her
a mile.
Having to be so strong all the time and having gone through everything that she just did and maybe learned a few lessons along the way, making her probably jaded at this point, she would destroy him. I don't know if they could make it work.
That might be true.
She would destroy him.
That may very well be true, especially since she has to continue to have this job. And, if he's working just making a minimum wage or something, I don't know if she's going to accept that. and be happy with it. But I do expect that, in Anora 2, Electric Boogaloo, that, he shows up at her doorstep and brings her coffee or takes her out to eat, and she goes with him. And does it continue? I don't know. Does she eventually, accommodate that? I don't think so. I think that regardless of whether she got everything she wanted or not, she's going to be, she's not going to go work. Let's talk about that for a minute. I think it's very interesting that this Russian oligarch has this giant mansion, all his friends that hang out with him, when you hear that, like, oh, I work at this candy shop or whatever, I'm like, is that some kind of front? And these guys are actually like all rich Russian billionaire kids. And then you say like, no, these kids are like, they show up at their jobs and they literally run the cashier at the candy shop, or they're a fry cook in the back of a restaurant. They need the job. They're like, I can't lose this job. They are just this first generation Russian immigrants who need like their fry cook job. Like these are not, and by the way, Anora's in the same boat with them. Like she is of the same class. So, and the same class as this guy, but I don't know if that's what she's aspiring to.
I feel like this guy would be perfectly happy to like just be with her forever,
sure.
But I don't think she's going to want to relive this catastrophe or be reminded of it.
Yeah, it might be salt in the wound for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like they're going to part ways and just think fondly of one another. I don't think they're going to strike up a new romance.
Okay, a couple of things I want to say here at the end, or one thing I want to touch on in the end, which is the ring. He gives her the ring. Resale, I actually researched this just out of curiosity. Resale value on engagement rings is terrible because people are like, oh, if someone didn't go through with the marriage, or if this person died or whatever, the reason you have this ring or the person rejected you, I don't want like a cursed ring. Women in general do not want used rings. Now, do you sell a used ring and not tell people that it's used? Yes, oftentimes. The jewelers will do that, but you can't get that price on the resale market. Plus, of course, you could take the diamond out and use it in other jewelry. But this is a 4-carat diamond. And if it's a real diamond, not lab grown, it would go for somewhere between $50,000 and $500,000. Now, this guy is not going to go cheap because, this kid wants to show off and definitely wants his parents to see how ridiculous the price of the thing was on the bill. Like that's part of the joy of this for him, I'm sure. So he does want to be lavish, but I don't think he's going to go $500,000. But this could be like a $100,000 ring. If she sells it for half of that, that's not a terrible payday. I got to say, considering what she probably makes in a night, that's a pretty decent amount of money I think she's going to get from the pawn shop.
And I think that's what he was trying to do, is help her.
Sure, of course.
When he gave her back the ring, because
Absolutely.
He didn't want to take the ring off, and they know it's expensive. They're like, give me that ring. And he's like, why are we doing that?
Right.
So, yeah.
But she could have gotten some money for that mink too. I got to say, that's like 20K, 30K.
When she's throwing the mink, away and stuff, that's why I think she was really going at this. Like, we're in love. You people can't stop our love. We're going to stay married and you can't tell us what to do. Even if like the money was a high point, I still think it was her in her head thinking, this is real. And when he asked her to marry him, she's like, you have to be serious about this. She's taking him at his word. This child is in love with me and I'm going to fight for our love. And when he's not so inebriated, he'll stop listening to his parents because he's married now.
Right.
And he's also going to fight for our love, which is why I thought they were going to have to kill her. So I don't think she
well,
was.
At least they go there.
Yeah, I really was like, oh my God, poor girl. Please don't kill her. I love her. I don't think it was all about money. I think she was also young and naive and she bought into the fantasy. An example is exactly that. She just flings this mink away. Like, I don't need
Sable,
your
actually.
money. I just
mink.
don't care, or whatever that was. If you rewatch it, maybe you'll see.
Yeah, I might have to rewatch it. I'm curious to try your read next time around. I just want to call out a few scenes, mostly comedic, that I thought were really great. One is, since we talk about the sable or whatever it is, I think it's sable, what it was. He mentions it when he touches it. He goes, is that real? And she goes, yes, of course it's real. It's just not mink, right? She got all upset. This is when she's still very antagonistic towards Igor. And then when she throws it at the lady at the, office in Vegas, and she goes, no. Like, don't throw that thing at me. And she touches it. She goes, wait a second, is this real? She's like shocked. She just got a real sable jacket thrown at her, which is, once again, she's going to sell that for tens of thousands of dollars. And another really funny scene for me was, I like when she kicks that guy in the face, that first poor guy who gets beat up so many times. And he's obviously concussed. And then he's in the car, and when you're concussed, not but if you're concussed, you just start vomiting, and they're just in the car, and he just starts vomiting violently all over the car. Out of nowhere, just hilarious.
That guy was hilarious because even when he's not on film, you can hear him in the background, like he's just so surly and like sarcastic. He was very, very funny, especially off camera for some reason. I don't know why that was extra funny.
And the other really funny moment I wanted to call out was when she ends up back at the club at the end. And of course, her nemesis there is giving the lap dance to her quote unquote husband. They are still married, so it's actually her husband. And then she storms out of there and they get into a cat fight. And all the girls who are like lined up, the 10 of them or more in those semi-private, dancing booths, they're like, oh, a fight. And they just like stop in the middle of their lap dance and run out. So like, it's like high school.
Yeah, because they're not invested in what they're doing. It's just a job. They're not even worried about getting in trouble because the owner of this club, like we talked about before, he's not really a menacing presence.
Right.
None of the girls feel like they are showing up there under duress or anything. Like they just seem, like we need a job. This pays really well. Right now, I'm at the prime of my life. I could make a lot of money right now. Nobody's like making me do this. So yeah, they all run outside. It is funny.
All right. This conversation went much longer than I expected, which is good. So let's save the conversation about Joker for let's meet up next week, same time. I'm very much curious to get your positive take on a very despised film, which is the Joker.
I'm a fan, both Joker movies, and I see why people are not a fan, but I disagree.
Yeah, that's very much why I want to get your take because, for example, we'll get into it, but I disliked the first Joker movie. I was looking forward to liking the second film as a corrective to the first. And I'm very much in the minority. I look at Letterboxd, for example, and you look at the people who gave Joker, the first one, like a 4 or 5 star, like 80% of the voters, they adore that movie. I'm in the minority. I gave it 2 stars on Letterboxd. I'm one of 3% to give it that low a grade. So I'm totally on the outside looking in. Then, like I mentioned, I kind of was interested in maybe having a contrarian take. And that's why I did a whole episode about it. If anyone's, I was hoping that I was going to have that contrarian take and like the sequel after not liking the original, but I didn't. But I'm very curious your perspective, Celia, because the audience that is, I love the first film and I love the second film is a very, very small one. So, that's really why the film has been such a failure. The vast majority of those people who liked it did not like the second. So I'm very curious to hear your take. There have been some positive takes coming in, by the way. Quentin Tarantino just recently did a very positive take on it, although I think his read of the film is very different than yours. His read of his positive take was that the filmmaker is saying to the audience, take that, you like this? And I'm like, I'm not sure that is your take.
I disagree. I heard that too. I don't agree with him. I'm glad he likes it.
Right.
That's not the take I was getting from it. I think it's all about perspective, and I'm a little strange. So I don't know how many people are going to really agree with me, and that's okay. But I do have, I think, very valid points why it is actually a good film.
I'm very curious to hear your opinion because I think this film is brave. It just doesn't succeed at what it's trying to do. So I give it credit for that. It just wasn't enough for me to understand how that works in the film, to be honest. I think we probably appreciate the same things about it, let's say. And we'll talk about the finale of Penguin. It's ending this week. So we can talk about Penguin, the season of Penguin, the finale of Penguin. And since we're in the DC universe, Batman adjacent worlds of Penguin with no Batman and Joker with no Batman, maybe we talk about that there.
I like these comic book things without actually having them act like comic book characters. I find it very interesting, including the Joker. Let's do that.
So yeah, we can touch base next week. We'll talk about the Joker movie and the failure of it at the box office and the contrarian take you might have, which I look forward to. I'm very curious to hear your take. We'll talk about the end of Penguin and maybe the end of America. Just we'll see.
Don't say that. Oh, don't say that.
We'll see how things are going 7 days from now.
I'm like so stressed out. Okay. I will see you then.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.